On the night of August 12th, 2000, Linda Turner sat in her living room in Tempe, Arizona, waiting for a phone call that never came. For 27 years, her daughter Melissa had called her every single evening, every single night, without fail. Linda would hear that familiar voice say the words that had become a ritual between them. "Hi, Mom, just got home. Love you." It was a simple thing, a small connection across the miles between their two homes, but it meant everything to Linda. It meant her daughter was safe. It meant the world was still in order. That night, the phone stayed silent. At first, Linda told herself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe Melissa had fallen asleep early. Maybe her phone battery had died. Maybe she'd gotten caught up with a friend and simply forgot. These things happen. People forget sometimes. But Linda Turner was a mother, and mothers know. Somewhere deep in her chest, in that place where instinct lives, she felt something cold and terrible taking root. Something was wrong. She called Melissa's apartment. No answer. She called again 10 minutes later. Still nothing. She left a message, trying to keep her voice light and casual, trying not to sound like a worried mother, even though that was exactly what she was. "Hi, sweetheart. Just wondering if everything's okay. Call me when you get this." The night stretched on. 11 o'clock became midnight. Midnight became 1 in the morning. Linda sat in her chair, staring at the phone on the side table, willing it to ring. Her husband David had gone to bed hours ago, but Linda could not sleep. Would not sleep. Not until she heard from her daughter. At 6:47 the next morning, the phone finally rang. But it was not Melissa's voice on the other end. It was a police officer, his tone careful and measured, speaking words that would shatter Linda's world into pieces she would spend the next 21 years trying to put back together. "Mrs. Turner, we've found your daughter's vehicle abandoned on Highway 60. We need you to come down to the station." Linda's coffee cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. Brown liquid spread across the yellow linoleum in a stain that would never quite come out, no matter how many times she scrubbed it in the years that followed. Her knees buckled. David caught her before she fell, his strong hands gripping her arms, his face suddenly as pale as hers. Their daughter was gone. The silver Corolla sat on the shoulder of Highway 60, 5 miles east of Tempe, looking exactly as ordinary as a parked car should look. The doors were locked. The windows were intact. There were no visible signs of struggle, no broken glass, no blood, nothing to indicate violence. But when the police opened it with Melissa's spare key, they found something far more disturbing than violence. They found normalcy. They found the evidence of a life interrupted mid-sentence, a story cut off before the ending. On the passenger seat, Melissa's wallet lay open, credit cards fanned out like a dealer's hand. Her driver's license smiled up at them from its plastic window. $37 in cash, a grocery store receipt, her insurance card, her library card, everything a person carries to prove they exist in the world. Beside the wallet, her cell phone, one of those old Nokia bricks, black and bulky, the screen blank. In the back seat, a paper grocery bag from Fry's Food Supermarket. Inside, a carton of milk, now warm from sitting in the Arizona heat, a loaf of wheat bread, a container of orange juice, a bunch of bananas turning brown at the edges. Tomorrow's breakfast, carefully selected, never eaten, and in the ignition, Melissa's keys still attached to the little, silver keychain shaped like a heart that Linda had given her for her 16th birthday. The keys were the detail that broke Lieutenant Daniel Morales when he arrived. At the scene that morning, he was 50 years old, 23 years on the force, and he had seen more abandoned vehicles than he could count. But those keys in the ignition told him everything he needed to know about what kind of case this was going to be. People who abandon their cars voluntarily take their keys. People who run away take their wallets and phones. People who stage disappearances do not leave grocery bags full of perishable food in the back seat. Melissa Turner had not left voluntarily. Someone had taken her, and whoever had done it was smart enough, careful enough, to leave almost no trace. Morales stood beside the Corolla as the sun climbed higher in the desert sky, already feeling the weight of what this case was going to become. Around him, forensic technicians dusted for prints, photographed tire marks, collected fiber samples. The highway patrol had cordoned off a 100-yard stretch of road. Traffic crawled past, rubberneckers slowing down to gawk. His partner, Detective Sarah Chen, walked over with her notepad open. Store security footage shows her leaving Fry's at 9:38 last night. That's the last confirmed sighting. Car was found at 6:30 this morning by a long-haul trucker. That gives us a window of about 9 hours. But realistically, this probably happened between 10 and midnight. Any witnesses? Morales asked, though he already knew the answer. 1. Truck driver named Victor Ramirez. He was heading north around 10 o'clock. Says he saw a dark green Ford F-150 parked on the shoulder near this location. Headlights on. Someone standing beside it. That's all he remembers. He was doing 70 and had a delivery deadline, so he didn't stop. Morales wrote down the details in his own notebook, underlining the words, green Ford F-150 3 times. Get me DMV records for every green F-150 registered in Maricopa County, and pull the security footage from every camera between Fry's and this location. Gas stations, traffic cams, convenience stores, everything. Chen nodded, but they both knew what they were facing. Thousands of green trucks, miles of highway with long stretches that no camera covered, and a victim who had vanished as completely as if she had never existed at all. The family? Chen asked quietly. I'm going to see them now, Morales said. He looked back at the Corolla one more time, at those keys hanging in the ignition, and felt a familiar cold weight settling in his chest. This was the kind of case that stayed with you, the kind that woke you up at 3 in the morning 20 years later, wondering what you had missed. Linda Turner was 50 years old when her daughter disappeared, a middle school teacher with graying brown hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She had raised 2 daughters, Melissa and Emily, in a small house with a carefully tended garden in a quiet Tempe neighborhood. She had been married to David for 30 years. She went to church on Sundays. She baked cookies for school fundraisers. She was, by every measure, an ordinary woman living an ordinary life, and then, in the space between one phone call and the next, her life became extraordinary in the worst possible way. When Lieutenant Morales sat down in her living room that morning, Linda already knew. She had known since 6:47, when the phone rang with the wrong voice on the other end. She had known even before that, in the long hours of the night when the silence had grown teeth and begun to devour her from the inside out. But knowing and hearing are different things. When Morales said the words out loud, when he told her about the abandoned car, the wallet, the phone, the groceries, the keys, Linda felt something inside her chest crack open like an egg, spilling out a grief so vast and so terrible that she thought it might swallow the entire world. We're doing everything we can, Mrs. Turner, Morales said, and Linda knew he meant it, could see the sincerity in his weathered face. We have search teams assembling right now. We're going to find her. But Linda heard what he did not say. The unspoken words hung in the air between them like smoke. We're going to find her, but we might not find her alive. We're going to find her, but it might be too late. We're going to find her, but what we find might not be what you want to see. Tell me about Melissa, Morales said gently, pulling out his notepad. Help me understand who she is. And so Linda began to talk, because talking about Melissa meant Melissa was still real, still present, still a person, and not just a case file. She told him about the little girl who had been afraid of thunderstorms and used to crawl into bed with her parents, tucking herself between them like she was trying to disappear. She told him about the teenager who had worked 2 jobs to save money for college, who had been responsible and studious, and maybe a little too serious for her age. She told him about the adult daughter who called every single night, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who still came over for Sunday dinners and helped with the dishes afterward. She was careful, Linda said, and her voice broke on the word. She locked her doors. She was aware of her surroundings. She did everything right. Everything you're supposed to do to stay safe. And it wasn't enough. That was the part that would haunt Linda for years to come. The knowledge that her daughter had done nothing wrong, had made no mistakes, had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, crossing paths with someone whose evil was stronger than her caution. By noon, the temperature had climbed past 105 degrees. The desert heat shimmered off the pavement in waves, distorting the horizon into a liquid mirage. 40 officers, 6 K-9 units, and dozens of volunteers spread out across 5 miles of scrubland along the Salt River, moving in a coordinated grid pattern, searching for any sign of Melissa Turner. Linda stood behind the police barricade, gripping a photograph of her daughter so tightly that the edges crumpled in her fist. In the picture, Melissa smiled at the camera with her green eyes bright, her light brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. It had been taken at a family barbecue just 2 months earlier. She had been laughing at something her younger sister Emily had said, her whole face lit up with joy. Where are you, baby? Linda's lips moved in silent prayer. Where did you go? Please be alive. Please be waiting for us. Please hold on. The helicopters circled overhead, their rotors beating the air like mechanical hearts. Infrared cameras scanned the ground for heat signatures. The dogs strained at their leashes, noses pressed to the red earth, searching for a scent that was not there. Volunteers called Melissa's name until their voices went hoarse, the sound echoing across the empty desert and fading into silence. By 3 in the afternoon, They had found nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing. By 5, the search teams were rotating out, exhausted and dehydrated, their faces sunburned and grim. By sunset, when the sky turned that particular Arizona shade of red-orange that looks like the world is burning, Lieutenant Morales made the call to suspend the search until morning. He walked over to where the Turner family was waiting and delivered the news that felt like a knife between his ribs. "We'll resume at dawn," he said, his voice rough with dust and defeat. "I promise you, Mrs. Turner, we are not giving up." Linda looked at him with eyes that had aged a decade in a single day. "She's out there," she said, and her voice was fierce despite the tears streaming down her face. "My daughter is out there, and she is waiting for us to find her. You have to keep looking. You cannot stop looking." "We won't," Morales promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. But as he drove back to the station that evening, watching the sun sink below the mountains, he felt the terrible weight of what he was up against. The desert was vast, the night was dark, and somewhere out there, Melissa Turner was either alive and terrified, or already beyond their help. He did not know which possibility frightened him more. The forensic report came back 3 days later. The hair found on the Corolla's seatbelt did not match Melissa or any member of her family. It was dark brown, approximately 4 inches long, with no root attached. In the year 2000, that meant it was essentially useless. Without a root, they could not extract a complete DNA profile. Without a DNA profile, they had no way to identify who it belonged to. The unidentified stain on the driver's seat was tested and determined to be biological in origin, possibly sweat or saliva, but the sample was too small and too degraded to yield conclusive results. The fingerprints lifted from the car's interior matched only Melissa and her family members. The tire marks photographed at the scene were consistent with multiple vehicle types and could not be definitively linked to any specific truck. Every piece of evidence they had collected led nowhere. Every lead they followed turned into a dead end. The green Ford F-150 sightings flooded in by the dozens, tips from well-meaning citizens who had seen such a truck in their neighborhood, parked outside their workplace, driving past their house. Each one had to be checked. Each one was eliminated. Without a license plate number or a unique identifying feature, they were chasing shadows. Morales kept Melissa's case file on his desk. Every morning when he came in, it was the first thing he saw. The folder with her name typed on the label. The photograph of her smiling face clipped to the inside cover. The growing stack of reports and witness statements and forensic analyses that all said the same thing in different words. "We have nothing. We know nothing. She is gone." But Morales refused to move the file to the cold case shelf. Not yet. Not while there was still even the smallest chance that Melissa Turner was alive somewhere, waiting to be found. Not while her mother called the station every single day, her voice trembling with hope and desperation, asking if there was any news, any updates, any reason to keep believing. 6 months passed. Then a year. The media attention faded. The search volunteers moved on to other causes. The tips slowed to a trickle and then stopped altogether. And finally, reluctantly, with a heaviness in his chest that felt like drowning, Morales moved Melissa Turner's file to the gray metal shelf in the cold case room. The label on the folder read in typed black letters, "Possible abduction, no body recovered." Those words were a knife in Linda Turner's heart every time she heard them. No body recovered. As if Melissa had simply evaporated. As if she had never existed at all. As if the 29 years she had lived, the memories she had made, the people she had loved, all of it could be reduced to those 3 cold, clinical words. But Linda refused to let her daughter become a statistic. She refused to let Melissa's name fade into silence. Every year on August 12th, she organized a vigil in Tempe Central Square. She stood in front of a crowd of strangers and spoke about her daughter, kept Melissa's memory alive with words. "My daughter was a real person," Linda would say, her voice amplified by a borrowed microphone, her hands shaking as she held the same photograph she had clutched on that first terrible day. She was not just a case number. She was not just another missing person. She had a favorite color, blue. She had a favorite food, spaghetti carbonara. She laughed at terrible jokes. She cried during sad movies. She called me every single night for her entire adult life. She was real, and she mattered, and I will not let the world forget her. The first year, hundreds came. Friends, family, co-workers, neighbors, strangers moved by the news coverage. They filled the square, holding white candles that flickered in the warm desert night, singing hymns and offering prayers for a woman who had walked out of a supermarket and disappeared into darkness. The second year, Maybe 150 people showed up. Still a respectable crowd, still a show of community support. But Linda noticed the empty spaces, the friends who had moved on, the co-workers who had found new jobs, the neighbors who no longer made eye contact when they passed her on the street. By year 5, the crowd had thinned to about 50 people, mostly family, some dedicated volunteers who had helped with the initial search and could not quite let go, a reporter or two, filing obligatory anniversary stories that ran on page 12 of the local section and were forgotten by the next day. By year 10, Linda and David Turner stood in Tempe Central Square with maybe 20 people scattered around them, most of them relatives or members of their church congregation who came out of loyalty, rather than hope. The vigil that had once filled the square now huddled in one corner, a small gathering of candles against the vast, indifferent darkness. "Do you think she knows?" Linda whispered to her husband that night as they drove home, the words barely audible over the sound of the car's engine. "Wherever she is, do you think she knows we're still looking? Do you think she knows we haven't forgotten?" David Turner, who had not cried in public since the morning they found the abandoned Corolla, felt tears sliding down his weathered face. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "She knows," he said, and his voice was thick with the weight of a decade's worth of unshed grief. "Our girl knows. She's waiting for us to bring her home." But privately, in the dark hours of the night when Linda lay awake staring at the ceiling, she wondered how long they could hold on to hope. How many years could pass before hope became its own form of torture? A cruel joke that the universe was playing on a mother who refused to accept what everyone else had already concluded. Melissa Turner was dead. She had been dead since that August night in 2000. And they would never find her body, never know what happened, never get justice or closure or any of the things that people said were necessary for healing. This was Linda's new reality. This was the rest of her life, stretching out before her like an endless highway with no destination, just mile after mile of not knowing, of questions without answers, of love with nowhere to go. In 2008, something unexpected happened. The internet discovered Melissa Turner. A true crime forum called Web Sleuths dedicated an entire thread to her case. Amateur detectives, stay-at-home parents, college students, retired police officers, all of them drawn to the mystery of the young woman who had vanished from a supermarket parking lot, leaving behind a car full of clues that went nowhere. The thread grew to hundreds of pages, thousands of posts, people who had never met Melissa, who had never been to Tempe, who lived on the other side of the country, or even in other countries entirely, all of them poring over the old news articles, dissecting every detail, building theories in the comment sections. The fact that the wallet and phone were left behind is key. This was not a robbery. This was personal. Or this was someone who wanted to send a message. What about the green truck? Has anyone compiled a database of Ford F-150 owners in Tempe in 2000? Can we cross-reference that with people who had prior arrests or restraining orders? I went to high school with Melissa. She was quiet, kept to herself mostly, always studying in the library. I cannot believe this happened to her. She was literally the last person you would expect this to happen to. Does that mean it was random? Just incredibly bad luck? Nothing about this feels random to me. The precision of it, taking her between the store and her car, leaving no witnesses, no evidence. This person knew what they were doing. This was planned. Emily Turner, Melissa's younger sister, found the thread late one night when she could not sleep. She had been 17 when Melissa disappeared, just a kid really, and now she was 33, married with a baby daughter of her own. She had tried to build a life that was not defined entirely by loss, tried to be a good wife and mother, tried to find moments of joy and peace. But reading through hundreds of strangers' posts about her sister, Emily felt something shift inside her chest. It was grief, yes, that familiar ache that never really went away. But it was also something else, something lighter. Gratitude, maybe? Hope, possibly. These people did not know Melissa, had never heard her laugh or seen her smile, had no personal connection to her story. But they cared. They were keeping her memory alive when it seemed like the rest of the world had moved on and forgotten. Emily created an account. The username she chose was simple, Melissa's sister. Her first post was short, just a few sentences typed with shaking hands at 2 a.m. while her husband slept, and her baby daughter breathed softly in the crib beside their bed. Thank you all for remembering her. Thank you for not letting my sister become just another statistic, just another forgotten name. My family has never stopped searching for answers. We never will. Reading your posts, seeing how much you care, it gives me hope that someday, somehow, we'll find the truth. The forum exploded with responses. Condolences poured in. Questions were asked with careful gentleness. Offers of help flooded her inbox. Someone created a Facebook page called Justice for Melissa Turner, and within a month it had gained 3,000 followers. People were sharing old news articles, posting about the case on Twitter, keeping the conversation alive in the digital spaces where information refused to die. Emily printed out some of the forum posts and brought them to her mother. Linda sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she had sat for so many years waiting for phone calls that never came, and read through pages of comments from strangers who cared about her daughter. Her feelings were complicated. It was comforting, yes, to know that Melissa had not been forgotten, that people were still talking about her case, still trying to solve the mystery, but there was also something deeply unsettling about it. These strangers were discussing the worst day of Linda's life, like it was a puzzle to be solved, a mystery to be unraveled. They used terms like victimology and forensic analysis and offender profile. They theorized about how Melissa had died, where her body might be hidden, what kind of person could have done this. They were treating her daughter's death as entertainment, true crime as a spectacle, a story to consume during their lunch breaks, or while they folded laundry, or as a distraction from their own ordinary lives. Linda did not know whether to be grateful or offended. In the end, she chose gratitude, because what else could she do? These people, with their theories and their amateur investigations and their well-meaning but sometimes insensitive questions, they were keeping Melissa's name alive. They were refusing to let her case go cold. They were doing what the police had been unable to do, which was to never stop looking, never stop asking questions, never stop believing that the truth was out there somewhere waiting to be found. And in a world that had largely forgotten about Melissa Turner, that had moved on to newer tragedies and fresher mysteries, that act of remembering felt like a kind of love. The years continued to pass. Melissa would have been 35, 40, 45. Linda marked the birthdays in silence, imagining the life her daughter might have lived. Would she have gotten married? Had children of her own? Changed careers? Moved to a different city? All those futures that would never happen. All those choices that would never be made. All of it stolen on a single August night. Linda grew older. Her hair turned completely white. Lines deepened around her eyes and mouth. Her back began to ache from decades of carrying a grief that was too heavy for any human body to hold. David's health started to decline, his heart weakening under the strain of 20 years of worry and sorrow and helpless rage. Emily had another child, a son this time. She named him after his grandfather, David Jr. She brought the children to visit their grandmother every Sunday, and Linda would hold them close and breathe in the scent of their hair and feel both joy and unbearable sadness. Joy because they were here, alive, healthy, loved. Sadness because Melissa would never hold children of her own, would never be an aunt to Emily's kids, would never grow old alongside her sister. By year 15, the vigil in Tempe Central Square had dwindled to almost nothing. Linda and David stood alone in the gathering darkness, just the two of them and maybe a handful of church members, holding candles that guttered in the desert wind. 15 years since Melissa had disappeared, and they were no closer to answers than they had been on day one. How much longer? Linda asked her husband that night, not really expecting an answer. How many more years can we do this? As long as it takes, David said. But his voice was hollow, his eyes vacant. They both knew what he was really saying. As long as we're alive. As long as we can still stand and still breathe and still speak her name. When we're gone, who will remember? Who will keep looking? The thought was unbearable. The idea that Melissa's case would die with them. That her name would fade into the archives. That she would become just another entry in a database of unsolved disappearances, forgotten and unmourned. Linda could not accept that. Would not accept that. Even if it took the rest of her life. Even if it killed her. She would not let her daughter disappear twice. And then, in June of 2016, 16 years after Melissa Turner vanished, a construction worker named Hector Rodriguez made a discovery that would change everything. The Sonoran Desert Expansion project was supposed to be routine. A new stretch of highway, some commercial development, nothing unusual. Hector had been working construction for 32 years, and in that time he had found plenty of strange things in the Arizona dirt. Bottles from the 1800s, old tools. Once, a sealed metal box filled with 1950s comic books in near-perfect condition, which he sold to a collector for $800. But he had never found bones. The bulldozer had just gouged out a section of earth about 3 feet deep when Hector saw them. White fragments scattered through the red soil like seeds. His brain tried to make them into something else at first. Something innocuous. Rocks maybe? Petrified wood. Old construction debris. Anything but what they actually were. Then he uncovered the skull. Hector stumbled backward, dropping his shovel, yelling in Spanish for everyone to stop. Stop, there were bones here, human bones. Someone call the police right now. The construction site fell silent. All machinery stopped. Someone dialed 911 with shaking hands. Within an hour, the site was sealed behind yellow police tape. Forensic anthropologists arrived with their careful brushes and their labeled bags and their cameras. They knelt in the dirt and began the painstaking work of excavation, revealing what had lain hidden beneath the desert floor for 16 years. Lieutenant Daniel Morales got the call at 6 in the evening. He was 73 years old now, officially retired from the Tempe Police Department, but still consulting for the cold case unit, because he could not quite let go, could not quite walk away from the cases that haunted him. And Melissa Turner had haunted him for 16 years. Sir, we've found human remains, the forensic investigator said, her voice careful and professional. The location is about 5 miles from where the Corolla was discovered in the Melissa Turner case. We've recovered some items from the burial site. I think you need to come see this. Morales drove to the scene as the sun set, his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, his heart hammering in his chest. 16 years. He had thought about this case at least once a week for 16 years, always wondering if they would ever find her. If he would die with that question still unanswered. If Linda Turner would spend the rest of her life waiting for a daughter who would never come home. The excavation site was illuminated by portable floodlights, casting harsh shadows across the desert floor. Forensic anthropologists were working with meticulous care, removing bones one at a time, numbering and photographing each fragment. Off to the side, evidence bags were being sealed and labeled. Dr. Karen Whitfield, the lead forensic anthropologist, approached Morales with 3 bags held carefully in her gloved hands. Her face was grave. We found these with the remains, she said quietly. I have not reviewed the full case file yet, but based on your description over the phone, I think you should look at these. Morales took the bags with hands that trembled slightly. Through the clear plastic, he could see a tattered light denim jacket, the color faded by time and soil. A silver heart-shaped necklace, the chain broken, the surface tarnished green. A pair of white sneakers, the brand logo still faintly visible despite 16 years in the ground. His throat tightened. He had seen these items described in the missing persons report, had stared at photographs of Melissa Turner wearing that jacket, that necklace, those shoes in the months after she disappeared, had memorized every detail, hoping it would somehow help him find her. It's her, he said, and his voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. It's Melissa Turner. Dr. Whitfield nodded slowly. We'll need dental records and DNA confirmation to be absolutely certain, but yes, I believe so. The remains have been here for a significant period, consistent with 16 years. And Lieutenant, there is evidence of trauma. Broken ribs, a depressed fracture on the posterior skull. This was definitely a homicide. Morales closed his eyes. He had known, of course. You do not bury a body in the desert if someone died of natural causes. But having it confirmed, hearing those words spoken out loud, made it real in a way it had not been before. For 16 years, Melissa Turner had been missing. A question mark. A possibility. Maybe she had run away. Maybe she was living under a new identity somewhere. Maybe she had amnesia and did not remember who she was. Maybe, now she was just dead. Murdered. Buried in the desert like garbage 5 miles from where her car was found. I need to call her family, Morales said. I'm sorry, Dr. Whitfield said, and she meant it. After all these years in forensic anthropology, identifying remains and delivering terrible news to grieving families, she never got used to it. Never stopped feeling the weight of each name, each life that had been stolen. Yeah, Morales replied quietly. Me too. The DNA confirmation took 2 weeks. 2 weeks during which Linda Turner existed in a strange limbo between terror and relief, hope and grief, knowing and not wanting to know. They had found remains. The remains might be Melissa's. After 16 years of not knowing where her daughter was, she might finally have an answer. But that answer meant Melissa was truly dead. Not missing, not lost, not waiting to be found alive. Dead. Gone. Never coming home except as bones in a cardboard box, evidence in a murder case, a name on a death certificate 16 years too late. Linda did not know which was worse, the 16 years of uncertainty, of living in that terrible gray space where her daughter was neither alive nor dead, but simply absent, or the certainty she was about to face, the knowledge that all those years of hoping had been futile, that Melissa had been dead since the beginning, that every vigil and every prayer and every moment of believing had been built on a foundation of ash. When Lieutenant Morales called, Linda was standing in her kitchen. The same kitchen where she had stood 16 years ago when they told her about the abandoned car. The same yellow walls that had not been repainted in all that time. The same old coffee maker on the counter. The same worn linoleum floor. Everything frozen in time, as if by keeping the house exactly as it had been, Linda could somehow keep Melissa frozen in time too, preserved in that moment before she disappeared. Still alive and still coming home, Mrs. Turner, Morales said. And the gentleness in his voice told Linda everything before he said the words. The DNA results are back. The remains are a match. It's Melissa. I'm so sorry. Linda did not remember making the sound that came out of her throat, did not remember her knees giving out, her body crumpling to the floor, the phone slipping from her hand. She only remembered the sensation of something breaking inside her chest, some last fragile thread of hope snapping under the weight of truth, and then a grief so vast and so complete that it felt like drowning in an ocean with no shore, no surface, no way to breathe. David found her there 20 minutes later, curled on the kitchen floor, rocking back and forth, whispering their daughter's name over and over and over like a prayer or a curse or a farewell. They buried Melissa on a Saturday in late June, 16 years and 10 months after she disappeared. The cemetery overlooked the valley, desert sprawling out in all directions, mountains purple in the distance, the sky an endless painful blue. The casket was white, adorned with roses in shades of cream and blush pink, Melissa's favorite colors. Beside it, on a small table draped in white cloth, Linda had placed the silver heart-shaped necklace and the tattered denim jacket, relics of that last night, witnesses to whatever had happened in those dark spaces between streetlights where cameras did not reach. Hundreds of people came. Former classmates who had not thought about Melissa Turner in a decade suddenly remembered her and wanted to pay their respects. Co-workers from her old job at the insurance company. Neighbors who had helped search in those first desperate days. Members of the Web Sleuths Forum who had followed her case for years and flew in from other states to attend. Reporters with cameras and microphones, documenting the end of a 16-year mystery. Linda stood at the podium, her hands gripping the edges to keep herself upright, and looked out at the sea of faces. Some were familiar, many were strangers, but they were all here for Melissa, and that meant something. That meant her daughter's life had mattered, that her death would not be forgotten. For 16 years, Linda began, her voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. I did not know where my daughter was. For 16 years I prayed that somehow, against all odds, she might still be alive. That maybe she had amnesia and could not find her way home. That maybe she was being held somewhere and would be rescued. That retries continue, maybe one day the phone would ring, and it would be her voice saying those words I had not heard in so long. Hi, Mom, I'm coming home. Linda paused, wiping tears from her face with trembling hands. The cemetery was utterly silent except for the sound of wind moving through the trees and the distant call of a mourning dove. That was the worst kind of torture, not knowing. Living in that terrible space between hope and despair, where every day brings the possibility of news, and every day that news does not come, wondering if she was suffering somewhere, wondering if she was calling for me and I could not hear her, wondering if I would die without ever knowing what happened to my baby. She looked down at the casket, at the roses that would wilt and fade just like everything else in this world. Now I know. And yes, my heart is shattered. Yes, I will grieve for the rest of my life. Yes, there is a hole in my family that will never be filled. But at least now I know. At least now I can stop living in that limbo. At least now I can say goodbye properly. Linda turned her gaze back to the crowd, her eyes blazing with something fierce and unbreakable. But knowing where she is does not answer the most important question. Who did this? Who took my daughter from a supermarket parking lot and ended her life and buried her in the desert like she was nothing? Because Melissa was not nothing. She was everything. She was a daughter who called her mother every single night for 27 years. She was a sister who helped Emily with her homework and taught her how to drive. She was a friend, a co-worker, a neighbor. She was a person with hopes and dreams and a future that was stolen from her. Her voice rose, carrying across the cemetery with unexpected strength. I want whoever did this to know that we will find you. Science has brought my daughter home to me. Science will identify you. Science will make you answer for what you took from us. You may have 16 years of freedom, but your time is running out. Justice is coming. Melissa is going to have her day, even if it took 16 years to get here. Emily Turner stepped forward when her mother finished speaking. She was 33 now, a mother herself, and she carried her 11-month-old daughter in her arms. The baby looked around with wide, curious eyes, too young to understand death or loss or the weight of the moment. This is Melissa, Emily said quietly, adjusting her daughter in her arms. I named her after my sister. I want my children to know the aunt they will never meet. I want them to know that their Aunt Melissa was real and loved and mattered. I want her name to live on. She placed a single white rose on the casket. I love you, big sister. I never stopped looking for you. And now that you are home, I promise you, we will find who did this. We will make sure your story does not end in the desert. It ends with justice. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Linda thought about all the years Melissa had lain in the earth just 5 miles from where her car was abandoned. 5 miles. Close enough that they had probably driven past that spot 100 times during the searches, during the vigils, during all those years of looking. Her daughter had been right there, so close, and they had not known. But she knew something else too. Something that felt like a small flame of hope in the darkness of her grief. The evidence had been preserved. The hair from the car, the stains, the photographs. Everything that had seemed useless in 2000 was waiting for science to catch up, waiting for the day when it could finally speak. Melissa's death would not go unanswered. Not if Linda had anything to say about it. The forensic laboratory in Tucson became the beating heart of the investigation's second life. Dr. Karen Whitfield spread evidence across a sterile steel table under harsh fluorescent lights. Items that had been sitting in climate-controlled storage for 16 years, waiting for this moment. The denim jacket, carefully removed from the grave, soil still clinging to its fibers. The silver necklace, photographs of the burial site, bone samples, soil samples, and most importantly, the evidence from 2000. The unknown hair from the Corolla's seatbelt, sealed in plastic, perfectly preserved. The unidentified stain from the driver's seat, fiber samples, photographs of tire marks. In 2000, these items had been nearly worthless. DNA technology was still in its relative infancy. You needed significant samples, complete genetic profiles, clear matches to known databases. The hair fragment had no root attached originally, making DNA extraction difficult. The stain was too small and degraded for conclusive testing with the technology available at the time. But 16 years had passed. 16 years of scientific advancement, of technological breakthroughs, of methods that had not existed when Melissa Turner first disappeared. Dr. Whitfield assembled her team of forensic experts and laid out the challenge before them. We have one chance to get this right, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 16 years of waiting. This evidence has been perfectly preserved, but some of it is fragile. Some of it is degraded, and once we use it, it's gone. We need to extract every possible piece of information from these samples. We need to find whoever did this. The lead forensic geneticist, a woman named Dr. Rebecca Chen with 2 decades of experience in DNA analysis, picked up the bag containing the hair sample and held it up to the light. In 2000, this would have been essentially useless, she said. But we've made extraordinary advances in DNA extraction and amplification. We can now work with samples that are degraded, fragmented, even contaminated. More importantly, we are not limited to just comparing samples to CODIS anymore. Lieutenant Morales, sitting at the conference table with Sarah Chen, now herself retired from active duty, leaned forward. Explain that. Traditional DNA testing compares forensic samples to the FBI's CODIS database, Dr. Rebecca Chen explained. CODIS contains DNA profiles from convicted offenders and arrestees. It's a powerful tool, but it only works if your suspect has been arrested and had their DNA entered into the system. What if our perpetrator has never been arrested? What if they've lived a completely law-abiding life except for this one terrible act? CODIS would never identify them. Then how do we find them? Sarah Chen asked. Forensic genealogy, Dr. Rebecca Chen said, and there was excitement in her voice, the enthusiasm of someone explaining a breakthrough that could change everything. Instead of comparing our unknown DNA sample to criminal databases, we compare it to public genealogy databases, places like GED Match and Family Tree DNA, where millions of people have voluntarily uploaded their DNA results to find relatives and build family trees. Morales felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying we can identify someone through their relatives? Exactly. We find genetic matches to third cousins, fourth cousins, distant relatives who share portions of DNA with our unknown subject. Then we use traditional genealogical research, birth certificates, marriage records, census data, obituaries, everything we can find, to build a family tree backward from those relatives. We work our way up the tree until we find someone who fits the profile. Right age, right location, right time frame. This is legal? Morales asked. Yes. The DNA in these genealogy databases was uploaded voluntarily. The database's terms of service allow law enforcement access in certain circumstances. And this is exactly the kind of case where it's appropriate. A cold case homicide with no other leads. A family that has been waiting 16 years for answers. Morales looked at the evidence spread across the table, at the hair that had seemed so useless for so long, at all the pieces of the puzzle that had refused to fit together in 2000 but might finally make sense in 2016. Then do it, he said. Whatever it takes. Melissa Turner has been waiting long enough. 3 months later, Dr. Rebecca Chen called a meeting. Morales and Sarah Chen drove to the lab in Tucson, neither of them speaking during the 2-hour drive, both of them afraid to hope, afraid to believe that after all these years, they might actually be close to something real. The conference room was dark when they arrived. Dr. Rebecca Chen stood at a computer, and on the large screen behind her was an image that looked like a tree lying on its side, branches spreading out in all directions, hundreds of names connected by lines that represented blood and marriage and the complex web of human relationships. "This is a family tree," she said without preamble, "built from the DNA we extracted from the hair found in Melissa Turner's vehicle. We uploaded the genetic profile to GEDmatch and found matches to 47 individuals. Most were distant matches, 4th or 5th cousins. But that was enough. We worked backward through public records, building the tree generation by generation, until we found the common ancestors." She zoomed in on one section of the tree. This branch here, the Harris family, originally from Tucson, but with multiple branches living throughout Arizona. We narrowed down the possibilities using age range, geographic location in 2000, and vehicle registrations. And one name kept appearing as the most likely candidate. She clicked a button. A photograph appeared on the screen. A driver's license photo of a man with short graying hair, unremarkable features, tired eyes. He looked like anyone, like everyone, like the kind of person you would pass on the street and never notice, never remember. James Michael Harris, 52 years old, currently lives in Tucson with his wife and 2 children. Works for Southwest Gas Corporation. No criminal record, no prior arrests. By all accounts, a completely ordinary man. She paused, and the silence in the room was electric. But in August of 2000, James Harris lived at the Brookside Apartments on Mill Avenue in Tempe, Arizona, less than 3 miles from Fry's Food Supermarket where Melissa Turner was last seen. Morales felt his heartbeat accelerate. After 16 years, after thousands of hours of investigation, after watching Linda Turner age and grieve and nearly break under the weight of not knowing, finally, they had a name, a face, a suspect. "Vehicle registration?" he asked, his voice tight. Dr. Rebecca Chen pulled up another document. In August 2000, James Harris owned a 1997 Ford F-150, regular cab. "What color?" Sarah Chen whispered. "Dark green." The room went absolutely silent. Morales stared at the photograph of James Harris. This ordinary-looking middle-aged man who had somehow managed to vanish Melissa Turner from a parking lot, murder her, bury her body in the desert, and then go on living his normal life for 16 years. Raising his family, going to work, paying his bills, existing in the world as if he had not destroyed another family's entire world. "My God," Sarah Chen said quietly. "After all these years, it's actually him." But Morales knew they were not done yet. The forensic genealogy had given them a suspect, had narrowed down millions of people to one name. But to arrest him, to prosecute him, to put him in front of a jury, they needed more than genetic probability. They needed direct evidence. They needed James Harris's DNA on that jacket, in that car, definitively and irrefutably placing him at the scene. "We need to get his DNA," Morales said. "Direct comparison. No family trees, no probabilities. We need to prove beyond any doubt that the hair in Melissa's car came from him." "Then we watch him," Sarah Chen said, "and we wait for our chance." For 2 weeks they watched James Harris live his completely ordinary life. Unmarked police cars parked down the street from his modest 2-story house in a quiet Tucson neighborhood. Detectives with telephoto lenses documenting his movements. Officers posing as joggers, dog walkers, utility workers, anything that would let them observe without being observed. Every morning at 7:15, Harris left for work, climbing into a newer silver pickup truck, the green F-150 long since sold or traded in. At 8 o'clock, he stopped at a coffee shop on Speedway Boulevard. Large black coffee, no cream, no sugar. Sometimes he would stand outside and smoke a cigarette before getting back in his truck, and the detectives would photograph him from across the street, studying his face, looking for something, anything that would give them insight into who he really was beneath the ordinary exterior. At noon, lunch break, usually a sandwich from a deli or sometimes a burger from a fast food place. Then back to work until 5. Home by 5:30. Dinner with his family visible through the kitchen window. Television in the evening. Lights out by 10. It was crushingly, depressingly normal. There was nothing in his routine that suggested guilt or fear or awareness that after 16 years, justice was finally circling closer. He was just a guy, going to work, coming home, living his life. Watching him, Morales felt a nauseating sense of disconnect. This man had murdered Melissa Turner, had ended her life violently, taken everything from her and her family, committed an act of such evil that it had left a crater in the lives of everyone who loved her. And then he had just gone on existing, had gotten married, had children, celebrated birthdays and holidays, lived all the ordinary moments that Melissa would never have. How was that possible? How could someone do something so terrible and then just continue being human? On day 14 of the surveillance, James Harris stopped at his usual coffee shop. He ordered his usual large black coffee. He drank it while sitting in his truck in the parking lot, scrolling through his phone. Then he tossed the empty cup into a trash can near the entrance and drove away. Detective Sarah Chen, watching from her position across the street, waited exactly 30 seconds. Then she walked calmly to the trash can, reached in with a gloved hand, and retrieved the cup. It was sealed in an evidence bag within 60 seconds. In a laboratory within 2 hours. Got it, she radioed to Morales, sending it to the lab now. The DNA comparison took 3 days. 3 days during which Morales could barely sleep, barely eat, barely think about anything except that coffee cup and what it might prove. 3 days during which Linda Turner called him twice asking if there was any news, her voice fragile with hope that she was afraid to fully embrace. When Dr. Rebecca Chen called with the results, Morales was in his car, driving nowhere in particular, just moving because sitting still felt impossible. "It's a match," she said, and her voice was shaking slightly with the magnitude of what she was saying. "Perfect match. The DNA from the coffee cup is identical to the DNA from the hair found in Melissa Turner's vehicle. James Harris was in that car. His DNA is on the clothing recovered from the burial site. There is no doubt. It's him." Morales pulled over to the side of the road because his hands were shaking too badly to drive safely. After 16 years, after all the dead ends and false hopes and nights spent staring at case files wondering if they would ever find the truth, after watching Linda Turner grow old waiting for answers that seemed like they would never come. Finally, they had him. James Harris was not just a suspect anymore. He was the killer, and they were going to make him answer for what he had done. "Get a warrant," Morales said, his voice rough with emotion he could not quite contain. "I want him in custody by morning." They came at dawn, because that is when arrests happen in cases like this. When the world is still dark and quiet. When the suspect is still asleep, still vulnerable, still unaware that everything is about to change. The SWAT team assembled in the pre-dawn darkness 2 blocks from James Harris's house. Body armor and rifles. Helmets with face shields. Battering ram ready in case the door was locked, though they hoped it would not come to that. This was a residential neighborhood. There were children sleeping in these houses. The goal was to take Harris quickly and quietly with minimal disruption. Morales watched from a command vehicle parked down the street, his hands clenched into fists so tight his nails bit into his palms. Beside him, Sarah Chen was silent, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the house where James Harris slept. Unaware that his 16 years of freedom were about to end. At 5:30 a.m. precisely, the team moved in. "Police. James Harris, come out with your hands up." The neighborhood erupted. Dogs started barking. Lights flicked on in windows up and down the street. Neighbors stumbled out onto porches in bathrobes and pajamas, phones already raised, recording everything. The front door of the Harris house opened. James Harris appeared on the porch wearing gray sweatpants and an old t-shirt, looking confused and frightened, his hair sticking up on one side, his face creased from sleep. "What is happening?" he said, his voice rising in pitch. "I don't understand. What is this about?" He did not finish the sentence. Officers swarmed him, forcing him to his knees on the concrete porch, pulling his arms behind his back, securing his wrists with zip ties. Inside the house, his wife was screaming. His teenage daughter appeared in an upstairs window, her face pale and shocked, tears streaming down her cheeks. "James Michael Harris," an officer said formally, reading from a card as Harris knelt on his own front porch with the dawn light breaking over the mountains behind him. "You are under arrest for the murder of Melissa Ann Turner. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." The words continued, but Morales was not listening anymore. He was watching Harris's face, searching for guilt, for recognition, for remorse, for something that would confirm what they already knew, that would give him some insight into how a person could kill someone and bury them in the desert, and then go home and sleep peacefully for 16 years. But Harris's expression was blank. Shocked, yes. Confused, certainly. But not guilty. Not remorseful. Just a man being arrested, protesting his innocence, looking like a victim of some terrible mistake. Maybe, Morales thought, some people just do not feel remorse. Maybe some people can kill and feel nothing afterward. Maybe evil looks exactly like an ordinary middle-aged man in sweatpants, being arrested on his front porch while his family watches and the neighbors record it all on their phones. As Harris was loaded into a police van, Morales pulled out his phone and made the call he had been waiting 16 years to make. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone twice before he managed to dial the number he knew by heart. Linda Turner answered on the second ring. She had not been sleeping, had not slept properly in 16 years. "Mrs. Turner," Morales said, and his voice broke slightly on her name. "We've made an arrest in Melissa's case. We got him. After all these years, we finally got him." On the other end of the line, Linda Turner started to cry. Not the wailing, desperate sobs of grief, but something quieter, deeper, more complex. Relief and rage and sorrow and triumph all mixed together. 16 years of emotion pouring out in tears that would not stop. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, thank you." But Morales knew the truth. They had not done this for thanks. They had done it because it was right, because Melissa Turner deserved justice, because her family deserved answers, because a promise had been made 16 years ago when he stood beside an abandoned car and looked at keys hanging in an ignition and vowed that he would not give up. And after 16 years, that promise had finally been kept. The trial of James Michael Harris began on September 12, 2021. 21 years and 1 month after Melissa Turner disappeared. 21 years during which Linda Turner had aged from a 50-year-old woman with laugh lines around her eyes to a 71-year-old grandmother with white hair and hands that shook when she tried to hold a coffee cup. The Maricopa County Superior Court was packed beyond capacity. Every seat filled. Media crews lined the hallway, their cameras and microphones ready to capture every moment. Overflow crowds watched on screens in adjacent courtrooms. This was not just a murder trial. This was the culmination of 21 years of waiting, of grief, of a family's refusal to give up, of science catching up to evil. Prosecutor Karen Whitfield stood before the jury in a dark blue suit, her expression grave but confident. She had spent 6 months preparing for this trial, reviewing every piece of evidence, interviewing every witness, building a case that was as airtight as humanly possible. She knew that the defense would attack the forensic genealogy, would question the DNA evidence, would try to create reasonable doubt, but she also knew that the truth was on her side. And the truth, presented clearly and methodically, was a powerful thing. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "This case is about time, about how 21 years can pass, how memories can fade, how evidence can sit in storage, how a family can grieve and hope and nearly break under the weight of not knowing. But it is also about how the truth does not change, how evidence, properly preserved, does not lose its power to speak, how science can give voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves." She walked slowly along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror in turn. On August 12, 2000, Melissa Turner was 29 years old. She worked as an accountant at a small insurance firm. She was responsible and careful. She called her mother every single evening to say goodnight. On that August night, she left work, stopped at a supermarket to buy groceries for the next day's breakfast, and then she vanished. Her car was found abandoned, her wallet and phone left behind, and for 16 years, her family did not know what happened to her. For 16 years they waited, for 16 years they hoped, and for 16 years her killer lived a normal life, thinking he had gotten away with it. She turned to face James Harris, who sat motionless at the defense table beside his attorney, his expression carefully neutral. "The defense will tell you that the state's case rests on circumstantial evidence, that we do not have a witness who saw James Harris abduct Melissa Turner, that we do not have a murder weapon, that we do not have a confession, and they are right about those things." She paused, letting that acknowledgement hang in the air. "But what we do have is something better, something that does not rely on fallible human memory or coerced confessions or questionable eyewitness accounts. We have DNA. James Harris's DNA, found in Melissa Turner's vehicle. James Harris's DNA, found on the clothing recovered from her burial site. DNA that was left at the moment of her abduction and has been waiting, perfectly preserved, for science to advance enough to identify it. Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution built their case with methodical precision. Dr. Rebecca Chen testified about forensic genealogy, walking the jury through the process of building family trees from genetic data, explaining how they had narrowed millions of possibilities down to one name. Dr. Karen Whitfield testified about the remains, the evidence of blunt force trauma, the timeline of death consistent with August 2000. Detective Sarah Chen walked the jury through the original investigation, the abandoned car, the preserved evidence, the 16-year wait for answers. Lieutenant Daniel Morales, now 73 years old and walking with a slight limp, testified about the green Ford F-150 witness report, the DMV records showing Harris owned exactly such a truck, the surveillance that had led to the coffee cup DNA sample. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, irrefutable, but the most powerful moment came when Linda Turner took the stand. She walked slowly to the witness box, leaning slightly on a cane, her white hair pulled back in a simple bun, her hands trembling as she placed them on the Bible to be sworn in. She wore a dark blue dress and the silver heart necklace that had been recovered from Melissa's burial site, cleaned and repaired, a piece of her daughter that she could carry close to her heart. Prosecutor Whitfield approached gently, her voice soft. "Mrs. Turner, thank you for being here today. I know this is difficult. Can you tell the jury about your daughter, Melissa?" Linda looked out at the courtroom, at the rows of strangers who would decide her daughter's case, and took a deep breath. "Melissa was everything to me," she said, and her voice was quiet but clear. "She was my firstborn, my careful one, the child who always did her homework on time, who remembered to call on birthdays, who helped her younger sister with math problems. She grew up to be a responsible, kind woman. She called me every single night for her entire adult life. Every single night. Just to say, 'I love you, Mom, I'm home safe.' That was our ritual. Our connection." Linda's voice wavered slightly, but she continued. "On August 12, 2000, that phone call never came. And I knew. A mother knows when something is wrong. I knew in my bones that something terrible had happened to my daughter." "Mrs. Turner," Whitfield said gently, "can you tell the jury what the past 21 years have been like for your family?" Linda looked directly at the jury, tears streaming down her face but her voice steady. "We have lived in a nightmare, not knowing if Melissa was alive or dead, not knowing if she was suffering somewhere, waiting for us to find her. Every birthday that passed, every Christmas, every time the phone rang, we wondered, was it her? Was it news about her? We could not move forward, but we could not go back. We were frozen in time, trapped in the moment she disappeared." She paused, her hands gripping the edge of the witness box. "When they found her remains in 2016, it destroyed us, but it also gave us something we desperately needed. We finally knew. We could finally grieve properly. We could finally start seeking justice for what was taken from us." Linda turned her gaze to James Harris, and the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Harris sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him, refusing to meet her stare. "That man," Linda said, and her voice was filled with a fury that seemed to make her grow larger, stronger, more formidable than her 71 years should allow. "That man took everything from us. He took my daughter's life. He took 21 years of not knowing. 21 years of torture. He took Melissa's future, her chance to get married, to have children, to grow old. He took Emily's sister. He took my grandchildren's aunt. He took all the holidays and birthdays and ordinary moments that we should have had with her." Her voice rose, trembling with emotion. "And then he went home to his own family. He had dinner with his own children. He celebrated his own birthdays and holidays. He lived a completely normal life while we were drowning in grief and questions and a loss so profound that some days I did not think I could survive it." The jury was transfixed. Several jurors were wiping their eyes. "I want you to understand," Linda said, looking at each juror in turn, "that Melissa was not just a victim. She was not just a case file or a news story. She was a real person. She had a favorite song, Fields of Gold by Sting. She cried during sad movies, even when she had seen them a dozen times. She loved the smell of rain in the desert. She made terrible jokes that made everyone groan. She was terrible at keeping plants alive but kept trying anyway. She was real. She mattered. She deserved to live." Linda's voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "Please, please give us justice. It is all we have left. It is the only thing that can come from this terrible, senseless loss. Make him answer for what he did. Make him pay for the life he stole and the 21 years he took from us. Please." When Linda stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of quiet weeping. Even the court reporter was wiping her eyes. The bailiff looked away, composing himself. Prosecutor Whitfield let that moment breathe. Let the weight of Linda's testimony settle over the jury like a blanket. Then she called her final witnesses, building the scientific case piece by piece until it was unassailable. The DNA evidence, the forensic genealogy, the green Ford F-150, the proximity of Harris's residence to the crime scene, the timeline that placed him in exactly the right location at exactly the right time, the coffee cup DNA that proved beyond any doubt that the hair in Melissa's car belonged to James Harris. By the time the prosecution rested, the case felt inevitable, overwhelming, complete. But defense attorney Mark Delaney was not done fighting. He stood before the jury in his expensive suit, his expression earnest and concerned, and began to systematically attack every piece of the state's case. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and confident, "the prosecution has presented you with a compelling story, a grieving family, scientific evidence, a mystery solved after 21 years. It is the kind of story that makes for good television drama. But this is not television. This is a courtroom. And in a courtroom, the standard is not compelling story. The standard is proof beyond a reasonable doubt." He walked along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. "The prosecution wants you to believe that forensic genealogy is infallible, that DNA evidence is perfect, that my client is guilty because a computer program built a family tree and pointed to his name. But I'm going to show you that their case is built on assumptions, on probabilities, and on a new and largely untested technology that raises serious questions about accuracy and privacy." Over the next week, Delaney attacked relentlessly. On the DNA evidence, he brought in his own expert witness, a geneticist from a prestigious university who testified about the possibilities of contamination, of transfer DNA, of innocent explanations for how James Harris's DNA could have ended up in that vehicle. My client owned a green truck. So did thousands of other people in the Phoenix area. My client lived near that supermarket. So did tens of thousands of other people. And yes, his DNA was found in the vehicle. But does that prove murder? Could there be an innocent explanation? Maybe Mr. Harris encountered Ms. Turner earlier that day. Maybe they bumped into each other at a gas station. Maybe he held a door open for her at a store. Transfer DNA is real. It happens all the time. People leave their DNA everywhere they go. On the forensic genealogy, Delaney hammered the privacy concerns and the newness of the technology. The state accessed genetic information from databases where millions of Americans uploaded their DNA with the expectation of privacy. They built family trees using distant relatives who had no idea their genetic information would be used to investigate their family members. They used probabilities and algorithms to narrow down suspects. Is this justice? Or is this a fishing expedition that violates the Fourth Amendment rights of every American who has ever taken a DNA test? On the lack of direct evidence, Delaney was merciless. There is no witness who saw James Harris with Melissa Turner that night. None. There is no murder weapon. There is no confession. There is no physical evidence placing my client at the burial site. The entire case rests on a single hair found in a car 21 years ago, analyzed using a controversial genealogy method that has been used in fewer than 24 cases nationwide. And you are being asked to send a man to prison for the rest of his life based on that. He saved his most effective attack for the timeline and the lack of motive. The prosecution wants you to believe that my client, a man with no criminal record, no history of violence, no connection whatsoever to Melissa Turner, spontaneously decided to abduct and murder a stranger in a supermarket parking lot. For what reason? They cannot tell you. They have no motive, no explanation, no evidence that my client even knew who Melissa Turner was. Delaney's voice was filled with incredulity. This is not how crimes happen, ladies and gentlemen. People do not suddenly become murderers without warning, without history, without reason. The prosecution's theory requires you to believe that my client was a secret monster hiding in plain sight, living a normal life except for this one random act of incomprehensible violence. Does that make sense? Or is it more likely that the forensic genealogy made a mistake? That the DNA evidence has an innocent explanation? That the state has the wrong man? It was a good defense. A smart defense. For 3 days, Delaney created doubt, poked holes, challenged assumptions. And watching from the gallery, Linda Turner felt her certainty wavering for the first time. What if they were wrong? What if James Harris was innocent? What if after 21 years of waiting, they had arrested the wrong person and the real killer was still out there? But then the prosecution's rebuttal began, and Karen Whitfield methodically dismantled every argument the defense had made. "The defense wants you to doubt science," she said, standing before the jury with absolute conviction in her voice. "They want you to doubt progress, They want you to believe that forensic genealogy is unreliable, that DNA evidence can be explained away, that this is all some terrible mistake. But let me remind you of the facts. Not theories, not possibilities. Facts. She held up her fingers, counting off each point. Fact 1. James Harris owned a 1997 dark green Ford F-150 in August 2000. A vehicle matching that exact description was seen at the location where Melissa Turner's car was found, at the exact time she disappeared. Fact 2. James Harris lived less than 3 miles from the supermarket where Melissa was last seen. He was in that area. He had opportunity. Fact 3. James Harris's DNA, not transferred DNA, not contaminated DNA, but hair with biological material attached, was found in Melissa Turner's vehicle and on clothing recovered from her burial site. His DNA was there because he was there, at the moment of her abduction. Fact 4. When confronted with the evidence, James Harris did not say, "Oh yes, I remember bumping into her at a gas station." He did not say, "I held a door open for her." He said nothing. Because there is no innocent explanation. Whitfield's voice rose with passion. The defense asks you to believe in an extraordinary coincidence, that a man who owned the right truck, lived in the right area, and whose DNA was found in the victim's car and on her body, is somehow innocent. That science made a mistake. That the genealogy was wrong. That transfer DNA explains everything. She shook her head slowly. But ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one. James Harris's DNA is in that car because he was in that car. His DNA is on Melissa Turner's clothing because he touched her. He touched her when he abducted her, when he killed her, when he buried her in the desert and went home to his family and pretended to be a normal person. She turned to look at Harris directly. The defense says we have no motive, no reason why he would do this. And you know what? They are right. We do not know why. We cannot explain what goes on in the mind of someone who is capable of taking another human being's life for no reason. But not having a motive does not mean the crime did not happen. It just means that some acts of evil are beyond our understanding. Whitfield walked back to the jury box, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. For 21 years, James Harris has lived a lie. He has gone to work, come home to his family, celebrated holidays, attended his children's school events, all while knowing what he did. All while Melissa Turner's body lay buried in the desert. All while Linda Turner waited by the phone for a call that would never come. The defense wants you to doubt, to question, to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they have the wrong man. But I am asking you to trust the evidence, trust the science, trust the DNA that does not lie, that cannot be explained away, that tells us with absolute certainty that James Harris is guilty of murdering Melissa Turner. Give Linda Turner the justice she has waited 21 years for. Give Melissa Turner the justice she deserves. Find this defendant guilty. The jury deliberated for 2.5 days. 60 hours during which Linda Turner aged another decade, her face growing more drawn, her hands shaking more violently, her sleep disappearing entirely. She sat in a small conference room with David and Emily, the three of them holding on to each other like shipwreck survivors clinging to debris, terrified that after everything, after 21 years, the jury might acquit. What if they let him go? Emily whispered on the second night, her voice breaking. What if after everything he just walks out of that courtroom? Then we appeal, David said. But his voice was hollow, his eyes vacant. We keep fighting. We do not give up, but Linda said nothing. She just stared at the wall, holding the photograph of Melissa that she had carried for 21 years, and prayed to a God she was no longer sure she believed in. Please, please let there be justice. Please do not let him go free. Please. Lieutenant Morales sat with them, as he had promised he would all those years ago. He was 73 now, his health failing, his heart weak. But he had made a promise, and he would see it through to the end. On the morning of the third day, the bailiff knocked on the conference room door. The jury has reached a verdict. The walk to the courtroom felt like a death march. Linda's legs barely held her. David had to support her weight, his arm around her waist, practically carrying her. Emily walked behind them, crying silently, her hands pressed to her mouth. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, standing room only, cameras everywhere, recording this moment for posterity, for history, for all the other families still waiting for their own answers. James Harris sat at the defense table, his face pale, his hands clasped in front of him. For the first time since the trial began, Linda saw something in his expression that looked like fear. Good, she thought with a fierceness that surprised her. Be afraid. Be as afraid as Melissa was in her last moments. As afraid as I have been every day for 21 years, the judge entered. Everyone stood. The formalities began. The ritualized dance of justice that had been performed in courtrooms for centuries. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. Will the defendant please rise? Harris stood, his lawyer beside him, both of them facing the jury. Linda could see Harris's hands shaking, could see the muscle in his jaw twitching, could see him swallowing repeatedly, his throat working. The jury foreperson was a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. A school teacher, Linda remembered from the jury selection. A mother, someone who might understand. The foreperson unfolded a piece of paper, her hands steady despite the weight of what she was about to say. She looked at Harris, her expression unreadable, and began to speak. In the case of the state of Arizona versus James Michael Harris, on the charge of first-degree murder, we the jury find the defendant. Time seemed to stop. The courtroom held its collective breath. Linda felt David's hand tighten on hers, felt Emily lean forward behind her, felt her own heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Guilty. The word hung in the air for a heartbeat. 2 heartbeats. And then the courtroom exploded. Linda collapsed into David's arms, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Emily screamed, a sound of pure release, 21 years of anguish and hope and grief pouring out in a single moment of triumph. Reporters frantically typed on their phones and laptops. Spectators burst into applause before the bailiff shouted for order. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for silence. James Harris stood frozen for a moment, his face chalk white, his expression stunned. Then slowly, as if his legs would no longer hold him, he sat back down, his head dropping into his hands. The judge waited for the courtroom to quiet, then spoke in a grave, measured voice. James Michael Harris, you have been found guilty of first-degree murder by a jury of your peers. The state of Arizona requests the maximum sentence. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Harris's attorney whispered something to him, but Harris shook his head. He did not look up, did not speak, did not offer any explanation or apology or acknowledgement of what he had done. The judge's expression hardened. Very well, James Michael Harris, for the murder of Melissa Ann Turner, I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. You will be remanded to the Arizona State Prison Complex to serve your sentence. May God have mercy on your soul because this court has none. Bailiff, take him into custody. As the bailiff moved to put handcuffs on Harris, Linda Turner stood up. Her voice rang out clear and strong across the courtroom, carrying a weight that silenced everyone. Melissa, baby, we got him. We finally got him. You can rest now. And for the first time in 21 years, Linda Turner felt something she had not felt since that terrible August night when the phone did not ring. She felt peace, not happiness, because how could there be happiness when her daughter was still gone? Not closure, because the wound would never fully heal. But peace, the knowledge that justice had finally, after all these years, arrived. James Harris was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his head down, his expensive suit looking suddenly shabby in the harsh fluorescent lights. His wife sat in the back row crying quietly, and Linda felt a moment of compassion for her. This woman had not done anything wrong. She was just collateral damage in a tragedy that had rippled out from one terrible act on one August night. Outside the courthouse, microphones and cameras surrounded Linda and her family. Questions shouted from every direction. Lights blinding in the afternoon sun, but Linda just stood there, holding David's hand, with Emily beside her, and spoke the words she had been waiting 21 years to say. Justice has been served. My daughter can finally rest, and I can finally begin to heal. The years that followed were both an ending and a beginning. James Harris was transferred to the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence, a maximum security facility where he would spend the rest of his life. He filed an appeal within a month, claiming that his Fourth Amendment rights had been violated by the forensic genealogy investigation, that his DNA had been obtained without proper warrant, that the entire case was fruit of the poison tree. The appeal was denied. A second appeal was filed, also denied. After 2 years of legal battles, his conviction stood. He would die in prison. In the cell where he spent 23 hours a day, did James Harris think about Melissa Turner? Did he remember her face? Did he feel remorse for what he had taken from her and her family? Or was he one of those people whose capacity for empathy had never developed, whose inner life was a mystery even to themselves? No one knew. Harris never gave interviews, never spoke about the case, never confessed to the details of what happened that August night. The how and the why remained unknown. Perhaps that was his last act of cruelty, taking those answers with him to the grave, leaving the Turner family with justice, but not complete truth. Linda Turner created the Melissa Turner Memorial Foundation in 2022. Its mission was twofold: to help families of missing persons navigate the nightmare of not knowing, and to fund advances in forensic science that could solve cold cases. The foundation partnered with genealogy companies, forensic laboratories, and law enforcement agencies across the country. It provided grants for DNA testing, helped families access resources, and advocated for better evidence preservation policies. Within 3 years, the foundation had helped solve 4 other cold cases. 4 other families got their answers. 4 other killers were brought to justice, and Melissa's name became synonymous not with tragedy, but with hope. Proof that even decades later, even when all seemed lost, truth could still emerge from darkness. Emily Turner took over as the foundation's director after Linda's health began to fail. She spoke at conferences about victims' rights, about the importance of forensic science, about how families survive when survival seems impossible. She became an advocate, a voice for those who had none, carrying forward her mother's mission and her sister's legacy. "My sister's case had a resolution," Emily would say in her speeches, her voice steady and strong. "But thousands of families are still waiting, still searching, still hoping. We owe it to them to keep improving forensic science, to keep funding investigations, to never let cases truly go cold. Because somewhere in a dusty evidence locker, there might be a hair, a fiber, a drop of blood that is waiting for science to advance enough to tell its story. Somewhere, there is another Melissa Turner waiting to be found, waiting to come home." Lieutenant Daniel Morales passed away in February of 2023 at the age of 75. His heart, weakened by decades of stress and the weight of carrying so many unsolved cases, finally gave out. He died peacefully in his sleep, with his wife beside him and photographs of his children and grandchildren on the nightstand. At his funeral, the Turner family spoke about how Morales had never given up on Melissa, how he had kept her case file on his desk for years, even after it was officially cold, how he had made a promise to find the truth, and had kept that promise even when it seemed impossible, how he had been there at the beginning, standing beside an abandoned car on a desert highway, and there at the end, watching justice finally arrive in a crowded courtroom. Linda Turner, frail now and walking with a cane, placed a letter in Morales's casket before it was closed. No one but Linda knew what the letter said. But those who saw her face as she whispered goodbye to the old detective knew it was a thank you. For believing. For persisting. For caring about a stranger's daughter as if she were his own. In Tempe, Arizona, a small memorial plaque was installed in a park near where Melissa had lived. The park had always been one of her favorite places, a quiet spot with desert landscaping and walking paths, where she used to go to clear her head after long days at work. The plaque was simple, bronze with raised lettering, set into a smooth stone, Melissa Ann Turner, 1971 to 2000, gone but never forgotten. The truth always finds its way home. Every year on August 12th, people still gather there. The crowd is smaller now than it was in those first years after Melissa disappeared, but the vigil continues. Candles are lit as the sun sets, stories are shared, and Melissa's name is spoken aloud, keeping her memory alive, proving that she was real, that she mattered, that she has not been forgotten. Linda Turner attended the vigil every year until she physically could not anymore. She would stand beside the plaque, one hand resting on the warm bronze, and talk to her daughter as if Melissa could hear her. "I kept my promise, baby. I found you. I brought you home. And I made sure he paid for what he did. You can rest now. We all can." Linda Turner died on March 7th, 2024, at the age of 74. Her obituary in the Arizona Republic was long and detailed, celebrating her life as a teacher, a mother, a grandmother, and an advocate. But the headline was simpler. Linda Turner, mother who never gave up, dies at 74. She was buried beside Melissa in the cemetery overlooking the valley. Mother and daughter, together again after 24 years apart. On Linda's headstone, beneath her name and dates, was a single line chosen by Emily. She never stopped looking. Emily Turner, now in her 50s with grandchildren of her own, continues the foundation's work. She speaks at vigils and conferences. She meets with families of the missing and offers them something her family desperately needed in those dark early years. Hope. Not false hope, not empty promises, but the real, hard-earned hope that comes from knowing that science advances, that evidence waits, that truth does not disappear just because time passes. "My mother lived long enough to see justice for my sister," Emily tells these families, holding their hands, looking into eyes that reflect the same anguish she remembers from her own mother's face. She waited 21 years, but she got her answer. And that is what I want you to hold on to. Your loved one's case is not closed. It is just waiting. Waiting for science to catch up. Waiting for the right piece of evidence to be tested with new technology. Waiting for someone to come forward. Waiting, but not forgotten. In the evidence locker of the Tempe Police Department, carefully preserved in climate-controlled storage, the physical evidence from Melissa Turner's case remains. The denim jacket, still bearing faint traces of the DNA that solved the case. The silver heart-shaped necklace, cleaned and returned to the family but then donated back to the evidence locker at Linda's request, so it could be used for training. The white sneakers, worn and faded, the hair from the Corolla's seatbelt, the tiny fragment that waited 16 years to speak, the photographs, the reports, the documented proof. These items are sometimes used in training sessions for new forensic investigators. They are shown as an example of why evidence preservation matters, why cases should never be truly closed, why science advances and truth waits patiently for its moment. Look at this hair, instructors tell their students, holding up the sealed evidence bag carefully, reverently. In 2000, this was nearly useless. Just a fragment with degraded DNA, no way to extract a usable profile with the technology available at the time. But someone preserved it anyway. Someone believed that someday technology would catch up. Someone had faith that the truth mattered, even if it took decades to emerge. And they were right. That is the lesson here. That is why we preserve everything. That is why we document meticulously. That is why we never give up on these cases. Even when they go cold. Even when years pass with no progress. Because you never know what future science will unlock. You never know when a faded clue will suddenly speak with perfect clarity. Melissa Turner waited 16 years to be found. Her family waited 21 years for justice. But in the end, the evidence spoke. The truth emerged. Justice arrived. And that is what we owe to every victim, every family. The promise that we will preserve their evidence. That we will never stop looking. That we will wait as long as it takes. The forensic genealogy method used to solve Melissa's case has since been used to solve over 200 cold cases nationwide. The Golden State Killer, the Bear Brook murders, the April Tinsley case, the Christy Marak murder. Case after case, decade after decade of mystery, solved by the same technique that identified James Harris. Families getting answers they thought would never come. Killers who thought they had gotten away with it suddenly facing justice 20, 30, 40 years later. But the method has also sparked intense debates about privacy, about consent, about the limits of law enforcement's reach into genetic databases. Millions of Americans have uploaded their DNA to genealogy websites, hoping to find distant cousins or learn about their ancestry. They did not consent to having that information used to investigate their relatives. They did not agree to become part of a law enforcement dragnet. Is it worth it? Does the end justify the means? Is solving cold cases important enough to compromise genetic privacy? The conversation continues in courtrooms, in legislatures, in ethics committees, in the court of public opinion. There are no easy answers. Just the reality that power always comes with a price, and progress always raises new questions. But for the Turner family, for the families of the 200 other cold cases solved this way, the answer is clear. Yes, it is worth it. Yes, justice matters. Yes, knowing the truth is better than living in uncertainty forever. In the place where Melissa Turner's remains were found, 5 miles from where her car was abandoned, nothing marks the spot now. The construction project was completed years ago. The highway was expanded, commercial buildings erected. Life moved on, as it always does, paving over the past, building on top of tragedy. But if you know where to look, if you have the coordinates from the police report, you can stand in approximately the right place. Red earth beneath your feet, deserts stretching in all directions. The same sun that beat down on that terrible August night in 2000 still burning overhead. The same mountains purple in the distance. The same endless sky. The desert keeps secrets, but it also remembers. Every grain of sand, every gust of wind, every moment of violence, and every moment of justice. Melissa Turner walked out of a supermarket on an August night, and the desert swallowed her. But the desert also gave her back, 16 years later, when the time was right. When science was ready. When justice became possible. Detective Sarah Chen, now 72 and long retired, sometimes gives lectures at the police academy. She always ends with the same story. In 2000, I was a young detective working my first major case. Melissa Turner had just disappeared. We had almost nothing. A car with her wallet and phone still inside. A witness who saw a green truck. A single hair that our technology could not analyze. and a family begging us to find their daughter. We failed. We could not find her. We could not solve the case. And for 16 years, I carried that failure with me. It was the case that got away, the one that haunted my dreams, the face I saw every time I closed my eyes. She pauses, looking out at the young faces in the audience, seeing her younger self reflected in their eyes. But here's what I learned. Truth is patient. Truth waits. Evidence does not disappear. It just waits for science to catch up. And families never stop fighting for their loved ones. Never. Melissa Turner waited 16 years to be found. Her family waited 21 years for justice. But in the end, every piece of evidence we preserved in 2000, the hair, the photographs, the tire marks, the documented timeline, all of it mattered. All of it spoke when the time came. So when you are working a case and it seems hopeless, when the leads dry up and the witnesses disappear and the evidence does not make sense, remember this. You are not just investigating for today. You are investigating for 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when technology you cannot even imagine yet will turn your faded clues into absolute proof. Preserve everything. Document everything. Never give up, because somewhere, a Melissa Turner is waiting. Somewhere, a family is holding on to hope that is almost gone. And somewhere, in an evidence locker or a filing cabinet or a database, there is a clue that will someday, somehow, lead to the truth. She looks directly at the audience, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The truth always finds its way home. Always. It might take 21 years, but it gets there. Melissa Turner is proof of that. This story is based on the real experiences of countless families whose loved ones have vanished, and the dedicated investigators who never stop searching. While the specific details of Melissa Turner's case are fictionalized, the science, the procedures, and the emotions are very real. Forensic genealogy has revolutionized cold case investigations. It has brought justice to families who thought they would never get answers. It has put killers behind bars who thought they had gotten away with murder. But it has also raised important questions about privacy, consent, and civil liberties that our society is still grappling with. If you or someone you know is dealing with a missing persons case, resources are available. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System provides support and assistance. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children helps families navigate the nightmare of not knowing. Local cold case units in police departments across the country continue working on unsolved disappearances, never giving up, always hoping for that one clue that will break the case open. And remember, evidence preservation saves lives. Science advances, truth waits, but it never disappears. For every case that remains unsolved today, there is hope that tomorrow will bring new technology, new methods, new possibilities. For Melissa, and for all those still waiting to come home.